You
I looked
can't
down the
do this
sights
to
of my
us!
rifle at two
This
men
is our
manhandling my
jurisdiction!
mother
Get
on
away
her
from my
own
mom!
driveway. They had her by both arms, dragging her toward a sedan with HOA cop hastily painted on the door. Her face wasn't angry, it was heartbroken. After 40 years of calling this place home, this was her reward. A lifetime of community service reduced to a struggle on the asphalt. I remember the gravel crunching under their boots, the way one of them hooked a foot behind her ankle to make her stumble. It was a calculated move meant to humiliate. Before I share how this personal war started, I want to know where you're watching from today. Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far a story about a quiet street pushed to its breaking point can travel. My mother's name is Clara. To call her the heart of Oakwood Estates wouldn't be just a saying, it would be an understatement. My father passed when I was 12, and this neighborhood became her entire world, her extended family. She knew every child's name, every dog's breed, every anniversary and birthday. She organized the 4th of July parade for 25 years, hand-stitching banners. She started the community garden that now feeds half a dozen families. When old Mr. Henderson broke his hip, it was my mother who arranged a meal train that lasted 3 months. She wasn't just a resident, she was the living memory and the moral compass of these 23 houses. So, when the current HOA board, led by a woman named Lydia Shaw, began issuing decrees that felt more like dictates, banning porch swings, regulating paint colors to a corporate-approved palette, fining kids for chalk drawings, the entire street looked to my mother. They didn't just encourage her to run for president, they pleaded with her. "We need sanity, Clara. We need you." She agreed, not out of a desire for power, but from a deep-seated need to protect the place she loved from becoming a sterile, joyless association of strangers. Lydia Shaw did not take this challenge lightly. Where my mother was about roots, Lydia was about image. She'd moved in 5 years prior from a corporate background and saw the HOA not as a management portfolio, but a management portfolio. Her vision was one of silent, imposing perfection, a neighborhood that looked pristine in brochures but felt cold to the touch. My mother's deep roots, her informal influence, her very popularity were a direct threat to Lydia's controlled, top-down authority. The campaign from that moment was never going to be clean. The harassment began subtly, then escalated with alarming speed. First came the letters, a notice for unapproved herbaceous border in her flower bed, a citation for unauthorized sentimentality display. They meant the faded hand-painted welcome rock my brother and I made for her decades ago. A fine because her recycling bin was placed at the curb 3 inches left of the regulatory placement zone. Each notice was a masterpiece of petty bureaucracy. My mother, ever the rule follower, would spend hours researching the actual covenants, taking time-stamped photos, and writing polite, fact-based rebuttals. Her calm documentation seemed to act like gasoline on Lydia's smoldering rage. The character assassination started next. Whispers, always just within earshot at the mailbox or the community pool. "Clara's a lovely woman, but maybe she's not as sharp as she used to be. This neighborhood needs forward-thinking, tech-savvy leadership, not just nostalgia." Lydia's allies would question with feigned concern whether my mother had the stamina for the role. It was a cruel, strategic erosion of her credibility, targeting her greatest source of pride, her competence and her connection. Then came the violation that was the pretext for everything that followed. It was labeled operation of an unlicensed social club in a residential zone. The criminal activity? Her Tuesday evening knitting circle, a gathering of 7 women that had met in her sunroom every week for over a decade, where they would share tea, talk about books, and, yes, knit. According to the citation, this constituted a commercial-grade social assembly requiring a permit she did not have. It was so blatantly absurd, we almost laughed.
Almost. That citation was the loaded gun on the table. It gave the supposed authority to escalate. And escalate they did. 2 men arrived at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. They weren't police, they weren't sheriff's deputies. They wore dark tactical pants and windbreakers with a generic security patch sewn on poorly. They had no badges, only laminated cards with blurry photos. But they had an air of grim purpose and a printed order citing the knitting club violation as grounds for immediate corrective detainment for non-compliance review. My mother stood on her porch, the printed citation trembling in her hand. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice firm but confused. "You have no authority here. Leave my property." The taller of the 2 men, a guy with a shaved head and cold eyes, stepped onto her porch step. "Ma'am, the HOA bylaws grant us authority for enforcement. You can come willingly or we can assist you. Your choice." When she didn't move, he reached out and took her wrist. That was the first touch, the crossing of the Rubicon. I was returning from the hardware store, a bag of mulch in my truck bed, when I turned onto our street. The scene hit me in a wave of disjointed details, the unfamiliar sedan blocking the driveway, my mother's slight frame between 2 large men, her body language a mix of defiance and sheer disbelief. I saw her pull back, and I saw the second man, shorter but stocky, grab her other arm. They weren't just talking to her, they were moving her, dragging her toward the car door they'd opened. My military training, a part of me I keep locked down in civilian life, took over before my conscious mind could process the outrage. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. My actions became mechanical, precise. I parked haphazardly, shouldered open my door, and went straight for the rifle case behind my seat. It was a bolt-action hunting rifle, .308 caliber. In what felt like a single fluid motion, I was across the lawn, the stock pressed into my shoulder, the safety off, my eye finding the sight picture. The 2 men, my mother between them. "Release her, now!" My voice was flat, devoid of the tempest roaring inside me. It was the voice you use when there is no room for negotiation. They froze, turning their heads. The tall one's grip tightened. Smirk played on his lips. "Son, you need to lower that firearm. This is official HOA business. You're interfering." That phrase, HOA business, said with such bland assurance, revealed everything. Real law has weight, gravity. This had the hollow ring of play acting, of borrowed authority used for malice. I knew then with absolute certainty that Lydia Shaw had sent them. This was an abduction dressed up as procedure. In that moment, I understood a dark truth. When the law is weaponized by the corrupt, justice must sometimes operate outside its bounds. The stocky man, still holding my mother's left arm, leaned in close to her ear. He spoke loud enough for me, for the neighbors I now sensed watching from behind curtains, to hear. "Listen, Clara, let's not make this ugly. You get on your community social page right now, you post that you're withdrawing for health reasons. You do that, we drive away. You refuse." He trailed off, giving her arm a painful twist. My mother gasped. Then she did something that shattered my heart and filled it with fierce pride. Through the pain and fear, she lifted her chin. Her voice, though shaking, was clear. "I have lived here for 40 years. You do not get to scare me out of my home. This is my community, not Lydia Shaw's." What happened next unfolded in terrible, slow-motion clarity. The man's face contorted from cold calculation to pure fury. The insult of her defiance in front of an audience was too much. He released her arm, drew his hand back, and swung. It wasn't a fist. It was an open-handed slap, but delivered with the full force of a grown man's contempt. The crack of it was obscenely loud in the suburban quiet. My mother's head snapped to the side. A A small pained cry escaped her lips. Her hand flew to her cheek, her eyes wide with a shock that went deeper than physical pain. It was the shock of utter violation, of a lifetime of dignity stripped away in an instant. That sound, that image bypassed all thought, all reason, all hesitation. A red haze didn't descend. Instead, a crystal clear, icy focus took hold. The man who had struck her was already turning back to me, his mouth opening, no doubt to spew some further threat. I didn't hear a command from my brain. My finger took up the slack on the trigger. I exhaled half a breath and held it. The first shot rang out, a sharp, definitive thunderclap. The round took him center mass. He jolted as if yanked by a wire, the smirk forever erased, and crumpled backward onto the meticulously edged lawn. He did not move again.
For a fraction of a second, there was absolute silence, broken only by the ringing in my ears. Then the second man, the tall one, made his choice. Instead of surrendering, he let go of my mother and ran. He sprinted for the driver's side door of the sedan, fumbling for the handle. Flight confirmed guilt. It confirmed this was not any form of legitimate authority. I pivoted smoothly, the rifle an extension of my will. I led him slightly, exhaled fully, and squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. Both rounds struck his legs. He went down with a scream that was more shock than pain, collapsing against the car door and sliding to the pavement, clutching at his ruined thigh. Then the true silence fell, a profound, heavy quiet. The only sounds were my mother's ragged, shuddering breaths and the low, guttural moaning of the wounded man by the car. I lowered the rifle. Its purpose served. The fire inside me banked, replaced by a chilling, procedural calm. I walked to my mother, who was standing frozen, one hand still on her reddening cheek. I gently guided her to the porch steps and sat her down. "Look at me, Mom. You're safe. It's over." I wrapped my jacket around her shoulders, feeling the violent tremor racking her frame. Only then did I pull out my phone. My voice was eerily steady when the 911 operator answered. "I need police and ambulances to 24 Oakwood Drive. 2 men impersonating law enforcement have assaulted my mother and attempted to abduct her. Shots have been fired in defense of life. 1 suspect is deceased, 1 is wounded and armed. I am the homeowner, and I am now unarmed and compliant." I gave my name, I placed the rifle on the dewy grass 10 feet away, stepped back and raised my empty hands high above my head. I stood there, between my mother and the street, as the first distant sirens began to wail, growing into a piercing chorus of red and blue that soon painted the houses in strobes of urgent light. The response was swift and professional. Deputies swarmed the scene, weapons drawn, voices sharp with controlled tension. They secured the wounded man, who was sobbing and begging, his bravado utterly gone. They checked the other, confirming what we already knew. They approached me cautiously. I kept my hands high, stated my name, and told them I was the one who had called. I was handcuffed, a standard and expected procedure. There was no resistance. "The weapon is on the grass. The evidence is on every camera facing this yard," I said calmly. An older deputy looked from my mother's bruised face to the dead man on her lawn, his expression unreadable. What happened next was not a legal battle, but a rapid unveiling of truth. The investigation was less about what I did and more about why I had to do it. The wounded enforcer, facing charges of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and impersonation in the terrifying prospect of a life in a wheelchair, broke before he even left the hospital. He gave them everything, a digital treasure trove of guilt, text messages from a burner phone linked to Lydia Shaw's assistant arranging the job, Venmo payments from an HOA slush fund labeled landscaping consultation, and a voice memo that was the smoking gun. On it, Lydia's voice, crisp and cold, said, "I don't care about the legal nuances. The point is to make her feel unsafe in her own home. The message needs to be physical. Make it clear she's not welcome in the race.
Do what you have to do. Lydia Shaw was arrested at a country club luncheon. The charges were severe: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, solicitation of assault, felony stalking, and misuse of HOA funds. She maintained a veneer of outraged innocence all the way to the courtroom, blaming overzealous contractors. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, sentenced her to 28 years in a state prison, remarking on the premeditated cruelty of targeting an elderly pillar of the community. The wounded enforcer took a plea deal for 15 years. The HOA was placed into receivership and disbanded by a unanimous furious vote of the residents at an emergency meeting my mother chaired from her porch, her face still faintly bruised. My own legal journey was shorter. The district attorney, after reviewing the doorbell footage from 3 angles, which captured the slap, the threats, and the clear attempt to drag her into the car, declined to press any charges. The ruling was a straightforward case of defense of others and justifiable homicide. The police returned my rifle. I cleaned it once, put it away, and haven't touched it since. My mother recovered, though a certain light in her eyes took time to rekindle. She won the presidential election in a landslide, of course. Her first official act was to dissolve any enforcement committee permanently. Her second was to host the biggest block party Oakwood Estates had ever seen. The sound that fills the air now is not the screech of tires or the crack of a slap. It's the laughter of children, the sizzle of grills, and the easy conversation of neighbors who finally feel free. So, I'm left with this question for you, and it's a heavy one. I acted on a primal instinct to protect the person I love most from imminent, violent harm. The law and the facts vindicated that action. But in the quiet moments, I still see his face turning toward me. I still hear the echo of that slap. Did I have another choice in those razor-thin seconds? Could de-escalation have worked against men willing to assault an old woman? Or was the line they crossed so profound that only a definitive, permanent response could raise it? I know what the court said. I want to know what you believe. In the deepest part of your conscience, what would you have done? This story isn't just about an HOA or a shooting. It's about what happens when the petty tyrants of the world decide your home, your family, your peace is negotiable. It's about the moment you realize some fences aren't meant to be mended, but defended with everything you have. If you've ever felt that surge of protective fury, if you believe in the right to stand your ground against absolute wrong, then hit that like button. And if you want more real, raw stories about the lines ordinary people are forced to draw, make sure you're subscribed to Trending Tales Pulse. The world is full of quiet streets where battles are fought. We're here to tell those stories.